There are two options open to us when we find ourselves in difficulty in terms of mental or emotional distress. There's two clear options open to us. One of which is to listen to the thinking mind and see if the thinking mind can guide us out of the mess that we're in. And the other option is to not listen to the thinking mind. As a culture, as I was saying, we have overwhelmingly come down on the side of listening to the thinking mind. So we have made the thinking mind our guide, our savior, in fact, because it's going to save us, supposedly. And as I was saying, the thinking mind is like a guidance device. It's like Google Maps. It will tell us where to go, and if there's problems along the way, it will tell us what to do to get through those problems. And this approach, for all that it makes abundant sense, and we have to watch out for things that make an abundance of sense to us straight away, because what that really means is just that we've been conditioned for it to make sense. So when it makes sense, that's because we've become habituated to it making sense. Not that it really does make sense. So we're just following grooves in grooves etched on the surface of our mind, which isn't going to help us any, really. Falling into repetitive, habitual ways of looking at the world is not what's called for when we are going through emotional or mental distress. Calling upon our habits isn't going to help us, because it's our habits that got us in there in the first place. And all of our thinking is a habit. As Krishnamurti says, thought is always old, and that's another way of saying thought is always a habit. Habits are always old. It's just a thing we've got into. So the thing to understand is that all of this guidance business is only good under very particular circumstances, and we need to be totally clear about that. It's only any good at all when we live in a positive world, a positively stated world. What I'm saying here is really, really very simple. It's got nothing to do with philosophy or metaphysics. It's just plain simple. A positive world is a world that is made up of known characteristics, knowable characteristics. There is a terrain there that can be faithfully reproduced in terms of a map. So a positive world is a world that we can know and describe and use maps for. That's what it technically means. So then the question is, are we living in a positive reality, or are we not living in a positive reality? And as always, we come down overwhelmingly on the side of, yes, we are living in a positive reality, even though we don't say that to ourselves, but we act as if that's what we have assumed. We have assumed it, we just don't know that we've assumed it. But there's a trick here. There's something we haven't spotted. And what's going on here is that thought has described the world to us. It's described reality to us in its own black and white terms, its own definite terms. Definite means it is this and it is not that. Very clear-cut terms. The mind always uses very clear-cut terms because it functions on the basis of this thing called a category, which is like a mathematical class. And mathematical classes generate two types of logical response. We could say they generate yes, it's in the class. No, it's not in the class. Is 14 in the class of odd numbers? No, it's not. Perfectly definite, totally definite. And because thought has nothing else to run on but mental categories, it cannot help but be definite. So the question is, does reality also run on mental categories? Is it also basically binary, yes and no, when we get down into it? We know computer simulations of reality are binary, but is reality itself digital, composed of yeses and nos? If it is, we can say that this is a positive reality. But so far there's been no sign, no evidence, no suggestion that this is a positive reality. In fact, all the physics is going in the opposite direction. What physics shows is that on the everyday scale of things, phenomena are measurable. Not all phenomena, but on the whole, phenomena are measurable and detectable. So this is the measurable world, and the measurable world pretty much corresponds, as I've said, to the positive world. But the difference with reality is that when we rack down in terms of our in terms of the microscope through which we're looking at it, when we get down to the fine detail, the fine grain, once we get smaller than the Planck interval, which is pretty small, I'm not sure how small, but it's pretty damn small, and this corresponds to the Planck distance and all of these kind of things that are measured in terms of Planck's constant. So once we get down beyond that, we hit something which is immeasurable, go smaller than Planck's interval time-wise, and we're in this immeasurable aspect of reality. Immeasurable doesn't mean that it's really, really small, doesn't mean that it's really, really big. It just means we can't measure it. It's not susceptible to measuring. Measuring is an unreal concept, an irrelevant concept. It just doesn't come into it at all. We can try measuring, and this is a famous thing everyone says about quantum physics. We can try measuring because we love measuring so much. It's kind of the thing that we do, we measure stuff. But then there's a glitch because the readings that come back reflect our choices that we've made in terms of our measuring, the instruments we've used to do the measuring. And this is a very well-known thing that people love to talk about. And it's interesting because it shows the limits of measurement. All you're getting is a reflection back at you, and there's no new information there. A reflection isn't new information. So this immeasurable world that is not susceptible to being turned into positive data, because if you can't measure it, you can't do that, corresponds to the Atman, it could be said, in Hindu Vedanta metaphysics. And the Atman, as Jung says somewhere, is smaller than small and bigger than big. It's smaller than a mustard grade and bigger than a big mountain. It's that kind of thing. So we're not talking about something that has an existence only in very recent developments in quantum physics. We're talking about something that is deeply rooted in mysticism and legend and myth. The motif of smaller than small and bigger than big, which Jung talks about quite a lot. Really, it's going beyond the confines of the rational world into that other world, which is, reluctant though we might be to see it as such, the real world. The rational world isn't the real world, it's just a convenient picture we make of things. So then what we can say is that, well, the physics, the science of things is tending to say that we don't live in a positive reality pretty clearly, very clearly, I'd say. And so what that means is this business of us relying on thought as the guide is not going to work. Thought, as I started off by saying, can only guide us in a positive world. Obviously, it can't guide us in a negative world. A negative world is a world that has no definable or measurable characteristics. So we ought to think about that. Well, maybe it's not right to say that. We ought to reflect on that. If we want what we're doing to actually make any sense, and when we're in mental or emotional distress, we're not messing around. We want something that's a good guide, not something that's entirely spurious. So this becomes a matter of great urgency. Now that sense of great urgency normally gets displaced in the direction of becoming ever more rigorous, ever more rational, ever more logical. And so we get this kind of the manifestation of psychology as a very, very logical, very, very rational kind of a thing. And psychologists are trying to be super rational. All other bits of their brains are deactivated practically. And I think this is inherent in any discipline that has a long period of training and which is very narrow-eyed, compartmentalized. It's fine to have a long period of training, but it has to be broad if we're dealing with human beings, because human beings are broad. So what this means is that when the voice tells me what to do this, do that, whether it's my own thoughts or whether it's the collective thinking of highly educated and qualified people who supposedly know what they're talking about. And that's what a kind of a rational therapy is. It's a program that comes out of this apparently authenticated, authoritative source. But that doesn't matter, no matter how authoritative we might say that it is. It's missing a very big, obvious thing. It's missing the point that we don't live in a positive reality, we live in a negative reality. And that is something we just can't afford to turn a blind eye to. So before we start talking about fixing problems and how logic always likes to fix problems, how the voice of thought, which is like a sat-nav, tells us how to fix problems, we could first note that fixing problems and exploring the territory or exploring the terrain are the same thing. They're not different things. We have to know the territory before we can fix the problems that arise in it. Otherwise, how are we going to know what needs fixing and what doesn't need fixing? The word fixing becomes meaningless then. So we can look at this as the most basic, essential challenge in everyday life, which was kind of the key thing, the key insight of Eric Berne's book, The Games People Play. Like one of the things that sticks out in that book, to me particularly anyway, is that the biggest problem facing human beings is that of unstructured time. So it's framing life, the whole business of life, in terms of this journey we have to make from when we wake up in the morning to when we go to sleep again, at whatever point, how we get across that unstructured space. So straight away, Eric Berne is observing that space is unstructured, that a life is unstructured. It doesn't come with roadmaps, it doesn't come in steps, a sequence of things to do. So straight away, he's sussing onto that. So how do we get across an unstructured space? Because we've got to get across it somehow. And the thing about an unstructured space is that there are no methods. Methods only work with structures. There's no method, there's nothing to do, there's no angle I can take to crack it. It's a tough nut to crack because I can't crack it. Nobody can crack it. It's the toughest nut in the universe. It's called reality. Reality is the toughest nut to crack because it can't be cracked. And you get cracked if you try to crack it. So what do? How do you figure this one out? From the point of view of rationality, this is a terror, it's a horror. And when we get super identified with the thinking mind and we have to get through the day, we will experience this terror. It's common. Certainly a considerable proportion of people with anxiety will talk about anxiety getting through the day, navigating through that structureless space. Precisely because there's no way to find an angle for it. If we find an angle for something we're not anxious, it's like, I know how to do it. Phew, problem solved. If there's no angle, then there's anxiety because I need to control. I think I need to control. Every cell in my body seems to be telling me, yes, you have to find a way to control this to get it to happen the way you in your brain want it to happen, because that's the only way it's going to work. But here's something that can't be controlled. So when there's a need to control or purposefully navigate life, and that is a fundamental, absolutely flat impossibility, then anxiety comes. If we got rid of the belief that we need to control, the anxiety would go. If we ended up in a positive reality that we could control and navigate, then anxiety would go. But the way things are is that reality is not positive, as I keep on saying, just to get the message home. So what Byrne says we do is that we develop routines, rituals, rigmaroles, games, pastimes, etc., etc. And we heap them all together, habits, and then we just follow each step of our routine, which is actually a cheat because our routines are not life. It's just a logical structure. It's a positive structure that we've created as a cheat, as a shortcut. So we skip through the day in that case, but we haven't really lived life. We've just played a kind of a virtual reality game in our heads where the rules are easy and you just have to do this and do that and do that. And the whole of society is just such a virtual reality game because it all comes with guidelines as to what's right and what isn't right, what steps to take and what to do if this step doesn't work. It's all linked up in that logical and systematic way. Therefore, it's not life. It's not reality. It's the creation of thought, which is like a big soap bubble because no matter how well we do in terms of the virtual, mind-created virtual reality, nothing's really happening because we're outside of, we've abstracted ourselves from life, and no matter what we get up to when we come back to life, nothing's going to have changed. We're going to be in the same spot. So that's like virtual escaping. We've escaped the problem by escaping out of reality, which is pretty much what we always do, because that's the only way to escape the problem. There's no way to escape it if we're going to stay in reality. So then, looking in terms of mental problems, in terms of what Eric Byrne says, when I wake up in the morning, one thing that I can do is project, as if I got a projector stuck on my head, project a positive reality, and then go from step to step within the terms of the positive reality that I have projected. So in that case, I do know the territory, and I do know, in theory at least, how to solve the problems that might arise. But as I've said, this is a complete and tremendous cheat, because that positive reality which I'm solving isn't real. I've just created something that I can solve because I don't like to be faced with something that I can't. So in mental health terms, we're doing the same thing. Instead of navigating or finding a route through the day, which is difficult even when we're not in emotional pain, mental pain, we're actually in a territory that is made up of mental pain. So then we have to navigate that, get through it, and hopefully get through to the other side. So we do the same thing. We project an idea of what this territory is, and then we try and maneuver in accordance with what our projected positive reality is telling us about it. So absolutely all rational therapy is like this. It's all projecting a map onto this territory, the territory being the territory of mental pain. And then we are urged to follow this step and then do that step and then do this and do that and do the other, as if that projected positive reality has any relation whatsoever to do with what I'm experiencing, which it absolutely doesn't in no way. Absolutely no way. The two aren't the same thing. One is a mental picture, the other is the imponderable and indescribable reality of life itself, the life that I'm experiencing, my experience. And I have to stick with what's real. I have to go through what's real instead of wasting my time trying to see it in the way that other people have told me I should see it, because they're wrong. They're always guaranteed to be wrong. There's only one person can know what it is, and that's you. And you don't know what it is in terms of logically understanding it. You know what it is in a much deeper and more intimate sense. That's how you know what it is. Nobody can tell you about that. In fact, other people try and falsify that understanding of yours and they say, oh no, it's nothing, it's just your head's playing up, you're not well, what's really happening is this. But that's not true. What we say is really happening isn't really happening, and what we're afraid to actually experience is what really is happening. So much for all the rational therapies in that case. What's the other possibility is that I mentioned right at the start, is simply not to listen. So my attention isn't on this voice, this rational implant that's telling me stuff. My attention isn't on that, so I don't listen to it anymore. I put my attention on what's actually happening firsthand, not according to someone else, not according to the theory books, not according to anything, but what I myself am actually experiencing. So that's a moment of autonomy. I've actually got my autonomy back at that point. Nothing to do with solving any problems. I've just got my autonomy back. I'm experiencing my life myself, not via any intermediaries, not via instructions that have come on high, models or theories, or pictures of reality that have come from some external authority. And getting my autonomy back is the very same thing as mental health. Okay, thank you. Thanks for watching.